record. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. The topic for today's Lunch and Learn is laying your garden beds to rest. My name is Nick Schwaberow, and I am one of three agriculture and natural resource educators at Purdue Extension, Marion County. And my focus is mainly on community gardens, school gardens. I am working with a couple of other colleagues in our office on a hydroponics project at the AMP at 16 Tech in partnership with Dr. Krishna Namali, who is a controlled environment agriculture specialist. We have bi-monthly, so every 2 months we have a intro to home hydroponics workshop that we give there, and we do have one coming up on December 13th. Promotion for that will be forthcoming shortly, and I will make sure to have that posted on our social media pages. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. If I can advance, let's see here. There we go. So the mission of Purdue Extension Marion County is to deliver practical research-based information that transforms lives and livelihoods. We provide relevant information and educational services to Marion County residents and organizations who share our passion for building young leaders, creating strong families and healthy communities, developing profitable businesses and trusted employees, and growing a vibrant natural environment. And so within Extension, and this is most Extension offices will have, they'll all have agriculture and natural resources. Some will have community development, typically the more urban counties, Lake County, Allen County, where Fort Wayne is, Vanderburgh County, where Evansville is. In Marion County, we have community development educators, health and human service educators, and 4-H educators. And on a personal note, I work quite a bit with our 4-H team here in the junior master gardener programming that we give, and also teaching them about home hydroponics as well. So at Purdue Extension, Marion County, we are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion. We stand committed to upholding the values of our DEI statement. And our statement is, Purdue Extension Marion County values underappreciated communities and celebrates human differences by embracing and recognizing the need for diverse, equitable, and inclusive structural change. We do this by increasing our programming, outreach, and partnerships with Black and Brown communities, ensuring representation and full participation of diverse voices and perspectives, and instituting a kind and trusting culture in our office through the words that we say, the actions we take, and the goals we set. Apologies, my mouse is not really advancing very quickly here. Okay. And here is our Justice for All statement. In compliance with USDA, we are accepting of all religions, creeds, backgrounds, political beliefs. And if you feel at any point we have not met civil rights requirements here, discrimination complaints can be filed with the USDA as stated, and we are also committed to fixing it. If you feel comfortable, please let us know directly. So with that, I will go ahead and get into the topic of today, laying your garden beds to rest. And I just want to say, this is a very broad topic. As I was putting this presentation together, I had some some trouble kind of discerning what's relevant and what's not relevant. It touches on a lot of other topics, so at times it may seem like I'm kind of going off on a tangent, and I may be, and I apologize for that if it comes off that way. My intention is to give a broad overview of all the aspects of laying your garden beds to rest, and that includes cleaning your tools, tangential things like seed saving, soil health, anything related to maintaining healthy garden beds, I think is important to verbalize during this presentation. So with that being said, I'll try to keep it succinct, but there may be some areas that may not seem immediately relevant to laying your garden beds to rest, but we'll have a discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free if you do have questions to type them into the chat, and I will look through that at the end of the presentation. So after you've harvested your last vegetable or fruit, make sure you have a map of your garden, and really this should be done. During or at the beginning of the season, prior to your plants actually fruiting. So at the beginning of the season, you want to map out your garden. You want to, if you're rotating crops, make sure you put down specifics. Say you're going to start off with spinach in a row, and then following spinach, you're going to plant tomatoes. The more specific you can be, the better it is for long-term planning. Make sure you have you keep a harvest log, reflects accurate amounts of what you've harvested. This is useful if you happen to plant the same thing in a garden bed the following year. You may want to compare harvest rates, or if you say you plant cucumbers in one bed the first year, and then the second year you plant cucumbers in another bed, you might want to look into different harvest rates to see if the first year you harvested more than the second year. Just different data points that may be of interest and may help you grow more efficiently in a third year, perhaps. It's very important that you clean your tools. You want to make sure that you've really gotten all the soil off of your metal tools. Soil left on tools can expedite rusting. So it's important that you, at the very least, brush them off. I tend to wash my tools. I use a soil knife mostly, and I find that to be a really useful tool, particularly soil knives that have measurements on them, inch marks or millimeter marks. It's very useful when you're planting, when you're planting anything from a seed to a bulb. And so I will brush off my soil knife, and then I'll wash it. I will dry it with a towel. I won't let it air dry because that can cause spotting, and depending on if your water's hard or not, that can cause some mineral buildup, and at any rate, it just doesn't look as nice. And then what I like to do is I typically use some mineral oil on the handle. If I have wooden handled tools, I like to put a little bit of mineral oil, rub that into them to kind of prevent cracking, warping. I find that really helps out there. You may want to sow cover crop seed. That's something that some people associate more with commercial farming. It's becoming more common to see cover crop seed, maybe some cereal rye or oats or wheat in a cornfield or a soybean field. That's also something you can do in your home garden. I like to sow a little bit of cover crop in my not so much in my raised beds, but if I'm growing anything directly in the ground, I will throw down some cereal rye or oats along with clover. With cover crop, it's a give and take. Typically, a lot of cover crops kind of overlap with the end of when the end of fruiting vegetable seasons, I would say. So, you may have to sacrifice some tomatoes in order to plant some oats and some clover. And that's just kind of an internal discussion you want to have with yourself. If you think your soil could, if you really want to invest more in your soil health and soil stability, it may be worth replacing some of your vegetable crops with cover crops and kind of shortening your growing season. But again, that's case by case basis. It's not something I would necessarily recommend every year, although it really is. It's just dependent on your personal growing space. And once you complete all of your end of season tasks, relevant to laying your gardens to rest, you want to monitor your garden beds throughout the off season just to make sure if there's any kind of heaving that you notice of the soil or just any irregularities that you want to take note of. It's good to write those things down because they can inform your next growing season. And then after that, or during that, I should say, at the same time, you want to be preparing for the next season. And I'll go through a few things in this presentation about what you can do to prepare. And this crop families little chart that I put to the right here, I put that there just so that you can get an idea of which vegetables are in similar or the same families. Sometimes when you plant vegetables that are in the same family in close proximity to each other, it's an invitation to pests. And maybe more than that, it could be an invitation to some nutrient deficiency. So being aware of what you're planting, what else it's related to in your garden, I think is very good to know. So I kind of just put that there, and I believe I have another chart coming up here. Kind of goes over some similar things in maybe a little more visual way. Yeah. So this is just a classification of vegetables according to plant families. And this is from veggiesgrow.com. Kind of gives you an idea. Some of these even surprised me a little bit. I don't usually associate cucumbers with pumpkins or squash or loofah even or bittermelon. So that family, it's kind of a little bit all over the place. Solanaceae family, I think people are mostly familiar with that. And I have to say I typically grow my tomatoes and peppers in close proximity to each other. I've grown eggplants in the past, and no matter where I put eggplant in my garden, the leaves always are they're eaten up, and the plants still produce fruit, but man, are those plants ugly. So at any rate, I just kind of wanted to give a broad overview here, something to consider when you're planning out your garden beds. And I want to direct your attention to these publications. These are 3 excellent publications that really, if you take a look at all 3 of these publications, you'll have a very good beginning understanding of what you need to do to prep your garden, how you can go about planning your garden spaces. And it's just they give all 3 taken together give a very good overview of the necessary things you should be doing when you're planning your garden. And laying your garden beds to rest is really, I mean, planting goes hand in hand with closing down your garden. And these are all available, I believe, through the Purdue Extension Ed store. If you type, what I would encourage you to do, there are codes under the horticulture and landscape architecture subtitle up top. There's HO-32, HO-32-W, which is a home gardener's guide, HO-66-W, which is the fall vegetable garden. And then there's HO-186-W, which is the Indiana vegetable planting calendar. And these are all available online for free in PDF format. I believe if you want to purchase a physical hard copy, you can, but there is a price associated with that. And typically we have these publications in our office, multiple copies, but they are available at your leisure online. And they're very good starting point. So, as I've kind of already alluded to, it's very important to keep good records of what you've been growing. This page is from Crop Rotation on Organic Farms, a planning manual. It's an excellent resource. They have multiple pages of planting diagrams, and I think I find it especially useful because they're color coded. So you can see they have a color key down below, and it's associated with the vegetable families that I showed on a previous slide. So, and you can kind of play with it. I mean, maybe you want to plant something in the Solanaceae family, whether it's eggplant or tomato. You're not sure, so you can be general and just put that family, or brassicas, or you can get specific and you can put red clover or garlic or something of that sort. It's the one thing I would really encourage is specificity. You can do it however you want, whatever makes sense to you, but be specific. The more specificity you can put in your garden plan, the more helpful it will be in the future. In the past, I've planned out my garden, and there were some pest issues that I noticed. So I would write down a note that said, I don't know, like rotting tomatoes or something like that. And I went back a year later and I thought, well, okay, rotting from what? Blossom end rot? Was there a bug involved? I wasn't quite sure. So taking detailed notes, planning out your garden beds, using color, using specific names of varieties is helpful. And yes, so the more detail, the better. Keeping at the very least, you want to have the vegetable family that you've planted. You may be dealing with squash vine borer. I know some people have had issues with that this year. Looking to see when you planted squash. If you planted it this year and you planted it last year, and you dealt with squash vine borer this year, it may be worth not planting it next year. And then in 3 years, 3 or 4 years down the road, you may be thinking, well, I want to plant squash again. Or 2 years in the future, you may be thinking you want to plant squash. Well, often it takes a few years for that vine borer to kind of get out of your garden. So having an accurate record of when you last planted squash can be useful in that way. Good crop rotation can prevent against pest pressure. It's not a guarantee, but it's a good practice to get into. It can help mitigate some nutrient deficiency. If you're planting a lot of vegetables that are in the Solanaceae family, you may be taking some of the nutrients out of the ground, and if you're not using certain kinds of cover crops and you're not fertilizing, those nutrients may not be replaced. So crop rotation is certainly a good habit to get into. And this is just a larger, I wasn't really happy with how big the image was on the last slide. This isn't much bigger though, but you can kind of get the idea of how you can plan out your beds. And so this kind of, I was just talking about this. And this is also very small. I apologize. And I can provide some of these resources via email as well in a more readable format. But basically what these pages are describing are cultural practices, non-chemical, non-pesticide practices you can take in order to mitigate against pest pressure and some nutrient deficiency. So some of them are discussing incorporating cover crops. Some of them are talking about crop rotation and tillage, resistance to certain pests. So I'm happy to share these resources in email as well. And this is from the Midwest Vegetable Guide, which was published this year. This is a good resource. Again, kind of, it's a good resource in conjunction with crop rotation on organic farms. They're kind of taking a holistic approach, really hitting on all the variables you might want to consider when you're planting. I've found it very useful. So cover crops are something you may consider after you've most of your garden has most of your vegetable plants are done producing fruit. You may want to consider planting cover crops. And cover crops are I highly encourage people to plant cover crops, whether they're on a commercial farm, whether they're a market gardener, whether they're managing a community garden. I think cover crops are beneficial no matter what, but there are nuances to cover crops. There are certain cover crops where I would not necessarily encourage someone to plant in their first year of using cover crops. Speaking from personal experience, and I believe this is a picture of cereal rye. I managed the campus gardens at IUPUI for a couple of seasons, and cereal rye is not a cover crop that winter kills easily. And what that means is that during winter it will go dormant, but then in the spring, as soon as it's warm enough and it still may be pretty cold outside, that rye will keep on growing. And so what you need to do with cereal rye in particular is crimp and press it down. And you may have to do that 2 to 3 times in my experience before it really, and maybe even tarping after even crimping and pressing. It is very resilient. It provides excellent soil stability, which is kind of why I planted it the way I did in these garden beds. I was noticing a lot of erosion on the sides of the beds. So I really wanted to plant it in a way where I could stabilize the edges of the beds, but then also have space to plant within. And then on some of these beds, not in this picture, but elsewhere in the garden that year, I believe I planted 3 rows of cereal rye, and my idea was to plant vegetable crops between those rows. And that's certainly something you can do. Cover crops can help with weed suppression. It won't suppress all the weeds, but I've seen instances, particularly at the Mayor's Garden plot at Eagle Creek, the Marion County Soil and Water Conservation District's garden plot, the Kevin Allison, the urban soil specialist, utilizes. I've seen him get some really good weed suppression using cover crop mixes there. So you don't just want to plant cover crops randomly. You want to have an idea of the kind of benefits you're looking for from cover crops. Do you mostly just want soil stability? Are you looking to set and store nitrogen? That's probably your main consideration there. What kind of benefit do you want? Do you just want weed suppression? I won't go into specifics. That's an entire presentation in itself to talk about cover crops. When should you plant cover crops? I kind of alluded to that earlier. They do a lot of cover crop planting windows do overlap with the end of growing season for a lot of vegetable plants. So that's something you want to maybe do a compare and contrast, kind of a Venn diagram sort of exercise with to determine whether or not it's worth planting cover crops. And again, winter kill versus crimp and kill, winter kill. Those cover crops will die as soon as the average temperature is below maybe 40 degrees or freezing. So those kinds of cover crops, you don't have to worry about them just going dormant and then surging back in the spring. Those will die of their own accord. Buckwheat comes to mind. That's a good cover crop for beginners because you plant it at the appropriate time, and then once winter comes along, it's not very cold hardy. So knowing what you're planting is very important if you're utilizing cover crops. And so this is just kind of this is an excellent resource by the USDA NRCS, and it's in conjunction with the cover crop seeding calculator, which can be found on their Field Office Tech Guide website. If you type in seeding windows for cover crops in Indiana into Google, this is the first, I believe, the first resource that came up for me. Very useful. It's gives you it gives you nuance kind of in terms of southern Indiana versus northern Indiana, which is something that I find very useful. I am a native of Fort Wayne, so the planting windows for Fort Wayne versus Bloomington, for instance, are definitely a little bit different, and even more different than Evansville. So I find this guide to be very useful. Something else relevant or related to laying your garden beds to rest is seed saving. And this is something that some of it's done at the end of the season, but some of it you would want to do throughout the season. If you're growing spinach or you're growing some early season vegetable crops, you may want to collect that seed in June or July when you're, just when your tomatoes are really starting to produce some fruit. Saving seed, it's great to do. I save a little bit of seed every year. The more seed you save, potentially the less money you'll spend the next year on seed. If you're comfortable starting seeds indoors, you can take that seed and you can start it in March or early April, and by Mother's Day or after Mother's Day, you can have some transplants ready to put out in the garden. You want to keep in mind that the germination rate of the seed you may save may not be the same as what is listed on the seed packet. the germination rate that you originally saw in your seed. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's why I tell people save as much seed as you can, because you may need to plant more in order to have a similar yield the next growing season. And then storing your seeds in a cool, dry, dark location, that's always advisable. And yeah, it can be economical if you're diligent about saving seeds. So again, just a word about sanitation. You want to make sure that your tools are clean. Make sure to brush off all of your soil, wash tools as necessary. Excuse me. When I have seeds here again. Yeah, make sure your seeds are stored in a cool, dry location. And sanitation, when I talk about sanitation, I'm not just referring to tools and to things you may use in the garden. I like to also include, bed management, garden bed management and sanitation, applying straw or some sort of other insulating material to your garden beds is advisable. That can help store more moisture than would otherwise reside in the soil. And then, yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I do like to use some sort of oil or wood preservative on my tools in order to just make sure they're ready for next season. And then you want to keep an eye on your garden beds during the off season. Record observations, any kind of anything unusual. Again, soil heaving, or areas that are kind of maybe a little bit too moist. Maybe there's some puddling occurring, kind of between winter and spring. Anything like that, any kind of environmental factor that may affect how you're growing once the growing season begins. That's definitely noteworthy and worth writing down. And so once you've, or I would say in tandem with monitoring your garden, you want to begin planning your next season. Again, having a detailed record, examples on the previous slides are a good template to follow. Excuse me. And I would just say, definitely at the very least, writing something down. If you don't feel comfortable drawing something out or using Excel to create kind of a representation of your garden beds, keeping detailed written notes, I think is highly useful as well. Yeah, refer to your records from previous years, utilize similar templates. With that, I'm not trying to discourage going to something drastically different from what you did the previous year, but in my experience, it's most useful if you kind of find a good template that works for you, planning template, and then just stick with that. And carry it through year after year. I think that's the best way to have to collect data that's useful and that is relevant for the next growing season. I definitely encourage people to start early. I think it's not a bad idea to start thinking in December or January about planning out your garden beds. You don't have to start that early. I hardly ever do, unfortunately. I would like to. That's my goal for this next planting season. If time allows, I think it's better to start earlier than later. So then you can get some transplants, some starts going inside and transplant them after Mother's Day. Be organized, but don't stress out too much about this. I think there are a lot of different things you can do for laying your garden beds to rest and crop planting. If you don't do all of them, don't worry too much about it. Do as much as you can with the time that you have. If you do even one thing, I'm pretty sure that's going to be helpful to you in the next growing season. And so this picture over to the right is another picture of the IUPUI campus gardens. And that, I believe that's garlic. And that is probably in the spring. We applied straw to all of the garden beds, and we're probably removing it there in April, if I had to guess. And with that, that is the end of the presentation. I do want to plug a workshop that will be happening next month, starts next month. And it is the crop to crop planting workshop. And this workshop is designed for market farmers, community garden managers, for folks that are managing gardens at scale in an urban setting, I would say. Not really for home growers, more for people growing on multiple garden beds. And this workshop it's a two-part series. The first of the two classes is on December 7th from 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And that will be mostly, that class will be experienced growers giving their perspectives on how they crop plan. The second day of the workshop on January 18th will be more hands-on. Ideally, we want folks to come back and talk about how they set up their crop planning, and to bring their own crop plans, and we can go over that with them along with other market farmers and community garden managers. So there's I'm not sure if you can scan a QR code through PowerPoint or through Zoom rather, but I believe this is published to our social media pages as well, and we'll be advertising it again leading up to, I believe December 1st is the cutoff for registration. I believe so. Yeah, there it is, December 1st. So please, if you feel that you are a grower that is managing something, like a market farm or a community garden, please register. Free to attend, and yeah, it's I think it'll be a great experience. And here's some of the publications I reference. And this is our social media. It's the same handle across all social media platforms. On Instagram, you might actually have to type in Purdue Extension, Marion County. And just a note about the next Lunch and Learn. I apologize. I meant to check this before starting the presentation. I'm not sure if we have one next month in December due to the holidays. If we do, it would be the fourth Friday of December. If we don't, then the next Lunch and Learn will be the fourth Friday of January 2023. So with that, I will go ahead and check the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and stop. Well, let's see here. Stop recording.